Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to join us this conversation. Today, I am joined by this month's featured member. And in featured member conversation, we're going to explore what an individual is up to in the world of psychology, therapy, coaching, or, as in today's case, the world of social care. The featured member for March is, brace yourself, we'll put a drum roll onto this as we go. I'm sure we'll get sound effects, everything else. But our featured member is Joe Liveston. Joe, welcome to featured member.
Thank you. Hello.
For those that have kind of, this is the first time they've got to see you, they haven't seen you in any of the panel conversations that we've already put out, or any of the other social media presence that you've had with APA. Give people a kind of glimpse into the world of Joe.
Well, the world of Joe is that I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker since 1996, which is how many years? I'm not very good at maths.
It's long enough to know better.
Quite a few. Long enough to have turned around and decided to work for Tesco's instead. So now, for the last sort of 10 years or so, I've been completely independent social worker, which means that I don't work directly for any particular local authority or employer. So I'm self-employed, and I do a mixture of work in the arenas of adoption, fostering, mental capacity, safeguarding, training, and anything else that seems to kind of fit with those sorts of areas. So pretty generic in lots of ways, but I don't do things like child protection, the standard things that a lot of people know social workers do. I don't do. So I don't do child protection. I don't do sort of case management anymore. I have done both, but not currently, and I haven't for sort of 10 years now. So I work for a whole host of different places: fostering agencies, adoption agencies, different local authorities, health authorities.
A lot of the auxiliary kind of support function within the social care arena that doesn't have the statutory protective kind of importance, if you like, of child protection. Everything else is proven.
But it's heavily regulated and heavily sort of legalized, if that's not quite the word.
Yeah, what I'm getting is your work is not at that sharp end of social care, and it's very much that support role around assessments, around reviews, and an overview of the environment in which someone may find themselves the subject of social care.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I was going to tell you that a lot of the places that I work with children in particular, so the fostering and the adoption primarily, they are all places which work from a place of wanting to do a sort of therapeutic angle within the way that those children are cared for moving forward. So some of that is about supporting the role of those parents, some of that is about training them, some of it is about monitoring that they are able to do that, and some of it is about assessing that they're going to have the potential to understand those kind of principles and apply them.
And you, as you said, you've been in this role now for 24 years, almost 25 years.
That makes me feel really old.
I get exactly the same when someone says to me, "And when did you start?" the world of social care has changed drastically in that time.
Yeah.
But I guess the kind of the leading question is, what do you think has been the biggest change?
Oh gosh, the biggest change probably in terms of what's affected my work, I would say it's the Mental Capacity Act. Has been the biggest thing that's massively changed some of the things that I do, some of the things that I'm allowed to do, some of the things that I now have the sort of sway to influence that I wouldn't have had before that act came in 2005.
And mental health and social care have been kind of linked for the longest possible time, but not actually been really given the teeth up until the act. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, I would say that's very fair, because I can recall times before that act was in place where people desperately needed someone to make a decision on their behalf because they weren't able to make it, or they weren't able to make a thought through decision that would keep them safe or that was reasonable. They just couldn't do it, but nobody had the right to do it for them. So you would you would end up having to try and sort of somehow engineer that this outcome would happen, even though strictly you didn't have actually the right to make it happen.
Yeah.
So,
And we saw so many abuses of that engineering of scenarios for so long, which is why the act came, or as part of the reason why the act came in being.
Yeah.
Do you think that social care in the 21st century is still growing, or do you think it's kind of struggling?
I think it's hugely struggling. It's massively underfunded. It has been for years. A lot of the processes are nonsense. Some of the ways in which the machinery works, in terms of like the local authorities and things, it just doesn't work. The system is broken, really.
Yeah.
And I guess as an individual social worker, it's a pretty much, well, for me, it's been pretty much about what can I possibly achieve within this broken system to make things as good as I can make them for that individual person or family that I'm working with, and how can I utilize what I know and who I know and and where I've got skills and things. How can I utilize that to just the best advantage, I suppose?
Yeah.
But it's not very often very perfect, and quite frequently is seriously disappointing, to say the least.
I suppose the kind of the idea of fighting a losing battle is quite dominant within the sector. So the question kind of comes up quite a lot when I speak to anyone in social media. Why do it? The system's broken?
Yep.
The getting the right outcome is increasingly difficult. Yep. And we're working with people that are almost being dictated to by a system that's broken on how they should or shouldn't be.
Yep.
And there's obviously resistance to that because we're all human beings.
Yeah.
What made you get into social work?
Oh gosh, what made me get into it? Well, do you know, I kind of fell into it, really. It wasn't, I was probably always destined to work with people, I would say. So when I was 19, I went to university. I decided that was the time that I wanted to go and do something different. I'd been working and I wanted to get away from that and the area that I was in and living with my parents and etc. and so forth. So I went to university and I did a degree, just a normal degree, not a social work degree. There wasn't any such thing in those days. So I did a social sciences degree. Mm-hmm. I had to kind of fight my way onto degree courses because I was only 1 year post like the A-level students, but that whole time since I'd left school I'd been working, so I didn't have A-levels, but nor was I considered to be a mature student. So I kind of fell in between the two kind of gaps, if you like, and I had to fight my way onto a degree course. I managed to get a place on 3 unconditional places on 3, so I was quite pleased with myself, really.
I can imagine.
I chose the one that I liked, where I liked the area the most, because I wasn't really sure what else to choose on. But all 3 were related to sort of people and psychology and those kind of things. So I had a place on the social science course that I did. I had a place to do psychology, and I had a place to do human behavioural studies, I think it was called, something like that. So in the end,
pre-runner to profiling.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that that's where I was headed. And I was already working with people as well, you know, just at 16, 17, I started doing, I was doing YTS training courses, if you remember those. Yeah. So I was running some of those, and very quickly the manager of the scheme was kind of like, oh, you know, you're really good with people. I'm going to put you in charge of all of the ex-offenders, and I'm going to put you in charge of all of the young people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities. That's going to be your caseload. Everybody else is going to do everything else. So even though I was probably half the age of most of the people there, I was given the most complex work to do, which I loved, you know, and I was good at it. So it was all good stuff. And then that was partly what led me, I think, into the degree course. And then, quite honestly, you know, to be not to sort of be mercenary, but I wasn't ready to go into the world of work when I finished my degree course. I wanted to still be a student, really. I wasn't done studying. So because I really didn't have that much money behind me in my family, I had to be on a course which gave me a grant to do it. So I thought, well, really, the only 3 courses that I potentially could have chosen would have been nursing, social work, or teaching. Those were the 3 where I could have got funded to go and study. So out of those 3, I felt that social work was my thing. And I had to fight my way onto that course too, because I was considered young to start it. So it's all very interesting. But I went to Liverpool, and I did a 2-year master's and diploma in social work at Liverpool, which involves like placements and things like that as well. So it was similar to the world of therapy in some ways, you know, with the hours on placement and that sort of thing.
And there's that kind of supervised overview of interactions in the field and everything else.
The first placement I had was in a drugs rehabilitation centre. So within a couple of weeks, I would say, of being there, they had me running women's groups. They had me running groups for people who'd been sexually abused. They had me doing all
at the deep end,
because I was good at it, you know, and it was. I think what everybody kind of said all along, really, from the very start, was you're good with people, and people talk to you, and people tell you stuff, and that's good for this world, you know.
It allows. I'm guessing that in at the deep end gave you a huge amount of knowledge, you know, a wide knowledge base very, very quickly.
Really quickly.
So enjoying people's one thing. And I'm sure most of the audience that will be watching will kind of attune to that concept of being a people person, connecting to people. That's all one thing.
Yeah.
But when you're a people person in a system that is struggling and has some some of the hardest retention and some of the most difficult connections possible.
Yes.
What keeps you going?
Oh gosh, a core of steel, I think. I don't know. I've always been quite a strong person, I think. I've never liked injustice. I've always been a very, very much the sort that would stand up and say if I thought something was wrong, or kind of battle against something if I thought it was an important issue. So I suppose that's just part of my personality, maybe, that sort of passion for making the world right, I guess, which I know I can't do, but I can make my little bit of the world right, and that's really important to me. And I think it's I often ask myself, well, if I won the lottery tomorrow, would I stop being a social worker? And I wouldn't. I would certainly cut back, I'm sure, in terms of hours,
do it from somewhere else,
and what I was charging and that sort of thing. I would no doubt be changing a lot of that, but I wouldn't stop doing it. I wouldn't stop doing it because it's me, and it's kind of like, I think without it, I'm not sure I would know who I was, really. It's such a big part of me.
Yeah. And when Siobhan and I look at featured member processes within the organisation, and we want to feature members who stand out for that level of passion, that commitment to what they do, but also the self-awareness of, I can't do everything. I can do my bit. And I know that I have to work with others. So for those that don't know, the world of social work is not a vacuum, is it? It's connected to so many other arenas around the care of people. What do you think is the most enjoyable part of that kind of multi-agency, multi-disciplined work that goes on within the sector?
Gosh, I love kind of getting that knowledge from those other professionals. So that's gone right back to like when I very first started. After qualifying, I worked in a hospital, and I learned so much from some of the other professionals in that hospital setting, the occupational therapy people and the specialist nurses and the doctors, and all of those other people that were doing something very different to what I was doing. But I learned a lot from those people if they were willing to share it, I guess, and that's probably the biggest hurdle, I think, often, is creating that rapport that will allow people to share themselves with you so that you can learn from them. And in a way that's not defensive or sort of adversarial. And sometimes social work can feel a bit like you're on your own and that everybody else is against you, and that's not a nice place to be, really.
Yeah, and we took part in a conversation recently around working with social work and therapy. And it was clear in right the way through that conversation how the need for the therapeutic understanding and the therapeutic approach within the realm of social work has increased over recent times. And you mentioned something earlier, that working with children in a fostered or adopted setting where there is now a drive for a more therapeutic approach.
Yes, there is.
Do you enjoy that connectivity with a young person on that level of, it's therapeutic? What makes that so different to what was there before?
Oh gosh, I mean, well, what was there before was kind of like plonk the child in the place, and they're not now in an abusive place, so they'll be fine. Walk away. That was how it used to be. And now it's more sort of how can we create this proper relationship that this child needs with their caregivers. So whether they are foster parents or adoptive parents or whoever they are, how can we create that, and what can we do as professionals to support it and foster it and build on it and help them to understand it, you know, all of those things. And you know, Joe Public doesn't know maybe that, I don't know, when a child has certain things missing from their early childhood, that they literally have no foundations. So we have to put the foundations in.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's beautiful that you've kind of brought us to that, because one of the things that APA's Community Learning Hive brings is a program designed for that purpose. And the Rampage program was described by a young person that went through the program as rebuilding their Jenga tower. The way they described it. And you know, I love telling this story, so bear with me for a couple of minutes, because a young 14-year-old goes into the care system. And we know that if someone goes into the care system under the age of 14, if they're not out of the system by 14, the chances are they will be connected to the system for life. And that's a scary fact. If we cannot get someone through that support system before they're 14, we are supporting them for life, which invariably means their offspring then has a 14-year cycle. And if we can't get them out before they're 14, their offspring. So it's a huge chain reaction.
Yes.
A 14-year-old goes into the system. High danger. They go through the Rampage program, and 2 years later they come back to us and they say, this is what it's like. Rampage. Think of me as a Jenga tower. At 14, I had key building blocks didn't exist, or they were depleted. They weren't all the same size. So my tower was doing this. Rampage came along and put the building blocks back in place where they were supposed to be. So we kind of went, that's a really nice kind of bit of feedback. That's great. Thank you so much. You know, wonderful. And then we started to kind of delve into it a little bit more and look at what the system generally does without Rampage. And we found that the system, with its tick box approach, like you say, of we've moved you from high risk to low risk. You'll be fine now. It didn't work for the last 40 years. It ain't going to work for the next, let's be honest. But we found that programs that were designed externally to social care were literally loading the bricks on top of that Jenga tower, rather than putting the stuff in at the base level. So someone who goes through the care system will have meetings at school because they're supposed to be at school. Well, APA believes that that's wrong, because it gives that young person another red flag to carry among their peers, another reason to be bullied, another reason to stand out as different, another reason why they should be treated differently. And then young people just rebel against it. So they don't go to school, because then you can't have your meeting at school. It doesn't make sense. It becomes counterproductive. So when we look at the growing change to systemic approaches, to therapeutic understanding, what do you think is the most positive thing that you've seen in your work in recent years?
Recently, I think the most positive thing that I've seen is therapeutic professionals working with me to try and understand a child or an adult, potentially. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a family at the minute where I've got to assess them for their suitability to adopt. They have some quite serious issues in their life for which they've had therapy. They still continue to have therapy. Both have given their permission to kind of have a joint approach between me and their therapists. And it's been such an insight, and it's actually made that process so much easier to get through for them, for me, and obviously the therapists have also gained something in that I spent time helping them to understand what will happen next for that family and how the process will work from approval onwards, what support they can have, how the system works, so that they can shore them up and support them further.
And it's that collaborative kind of triad,
yes,
that APA advocates on almost kind of multiple levels.
Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't happen that often, so it's actually quite unusual, to kind of manage to create that. And partly the opportunity to create it has come through lockdown because of the ease with which you can meet together with different people who are in different locations without having to travel. And so there's a plus side to some of the problems that we've all had in dealing with Zooms and all the rest of it. There is a plus side too, which is things like that can happen, whereas they may not have happened before.
And we've heard a lot in the media over the last year about how social care has kind of been devastated by COVID and the impact of not being able to do home visits, and the fear factor around home visits and direct contact, everything else. What's your take on the kind of protocols that were almost kind of put to a back burner in order to facilitate COVID?
I think it's been an absolute nightmare, to be honest. Very difficult, especially for those people who are working still directly with statutory settings. But even for me, it's been a nightmare. That's the only way I can describe it, really. It's I think it's been hard. It's harder work to manage what needs to be done remotely, even though a lot of it can be done remotely. It's much more difficult. I think it's hard. It's a lot harder also. I mean, we all know that I'm sitting in my car right now. Why am I sitting in my car right now? Because I have 2 children and a partner and a dog in the house. And I haven't got really a quiet, private place where I can have this conversation without being interrupted by one of the above, or all of the above, potentially. So it's kind of, the amount of times that I've had to come and sit in my car to make confidential phone calls or to do quite lengthy meetings or assessment stuff where it's, where you just can't be in the house, really, is quite... I think I've used my car more for that than I have for anything else. Let's put it that way. So,
it has become that kind of breakout room.
We've all started calling it the car office. So now I say, I'm just going out to the car office. I'll be back in an hour or whatever. And it's it's almost become a little joke, really, because so people have got so used to seeing me talking to them from my car. I think they'll almost be surprised when they see me and I'm not sitting in my car.
was that just a really fancy backdrop that you had for your Zoom call?
No, you think you'd pick something a bit better, wouldn't you? Really?
You know, come on. Everyone has their coping strategies.
Yeah, and it works. It's it's not ideal, but it does work. It's a bit unfortunate when it's chilly because you've got to leave the engine running, really.
Yeah, no.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, but it leads us into the question of the well-being for the practitioner.
Yeah,
and we've spoken at length in the past about the need for self-care for the professional, and that includes social care and teachers, law enforcement, everything.
Yeah,
almost a need for decompression space.
Yes.
And with social workers in particular, we have seen the burnout rate go through the roof in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And the reason I say 18 months and not a year is because it was already spiking before COVID.
Yep.
What do you think are your top tips for kind of decompression?
Oh gosh, I think just creating time where you're not working and you're not thinking about work, and it's something else that you enjoy or that is important to you. So for me, it might be my family, my dog, those kind of things. Cooking, I love to cook. So those will be the things that I will go to take my mind off work stuff. But I think it's particularly difficult to achieve when you're working from home. It's very hard. And then if your work puts you under a lot of pressure, a lot of time pressure, a lot of capacity pressure, urgent issues come up unexpectedly, and the expectation is always that you will drop everything else, no matter what, and you will do whatever the thing is that needs.
Yeah, it's almost like that phone goes off and you run into the cave to fix the challenge.
Yeah. But it often can be a bit like firefighting, really. Inevitably, if something goes wrong on one of your caseload, then you will nearly always, you can guarantee that they'll all start going wrong, because it's I don't know, it's just like the
Murphy's law, as they say. And Murphy's law.
Yes.
If it's going to go wrong, it will go wrong.
Yeah.
And if it will go wrong, it will go wrong everywhere.
Yes. It can be definitely.
Yeah. And I can remember growing up, and having the children that were being fostered by the family, and you would see the chain reaction of one thing going wrong in one place, and it just domino effects into everything else.
Yeah.
And those kind of fire breaks, as my ma used to call them, we need to have a fire break. So it would be a case of something is going wrong here, we need to put the fire break in now so it doesn't impact on everyone else. And that was something that I've seen more of that kind of approach in the last year than I've probably seen in the years before. But your profile now is getting that much stronger. As an independent social worker, we don't really see that kind of profile raised in any great shapes. So what have you been up to be driving that? What's going on? What is afoot?
Gosh, what have I been up to driving that? Well, a couple of things, but I think mostly and most recently, most important in my heart at the moment is the situation with COVID and people in care homes who are not able to have their family or friends to come and visit them and haven't been for an extended period of time. They're still not. So although there's been some changes to the regulations, they're still not being followed really. So I'm in touch with several relatives who have people in care homes that they're trying to either get them out of the care home and maybe into the community, or they're trying to access more time with them, or even any time with them in some cases, and just trying to help those people, I suppose, to understand what the law says and what things might help them to push their view kind of forward. Really, it's really heartbreaking, to be honest, to witness. So I see a whole host of people, right from younger people with physical disabilities or learning disabilities in particular, right through to sort of adult people with things like Huntington's or MS or those kind of conditions. And then obviously the older adults that we all kind of think of when we think of care homes, with dementia maybe, or physical health problems, that kind of thing. And some of these care homes are very good, and some of them are very bad. That's always been the case. That's no different. That hasn't changed. But I suppose the ones that are, and always were, very good, have been much more proactive about putting protocols in place to allow safe visiting to happen, and encourage kind of contact to be ongoing, even if that for periods of time has had to be virtual. They've put so much more effort into making it not realistic, what's the word I want, making it
accessible.
Yes, and sort of real, I suppose. Not just lip service. That's what I'm trying to say. Whereas the ones that are not very good, in my experience, are the exact ones who are like, no, nobody is visiting. We've got to wait until all of our staff and all of our residents have had 2 vaccines. That's nonsense, according to the science. We are not allowing anybody other than one person to come in once every 2 weeks for like half an hour. Well,
Do you think that's fear-based? Do you think that is ultimately fear-based, or do you think it is
maybe started like that? I don't think it is fear-based anymore. I think it's power-based.
That's scary, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially when we've spent the last 25 years explaining to people the importance of avoiding isolation.
I know.
And what loneliness, and when I say loneliness, I don't mean being in a room with other people.
I know.
I mean meaningful contact, love, life, friendship, contact, human interaction.
Yeah, with the people who
who matter.
trust. And I'm not saying that people don't know and trust their carers, because sometimes they do, often they do, and that's wonderful, but it can't replace a child or a partner or a parent, or do you know what I mean? It can't replace those things. Just like, we can't, when we are fostering or adopting children, we can't replace those biological parents.
And
we can put something else in, something that's different and something that works, but we can't replace them.
That bond, that means loneliness is kept at bay.
Yes.
Is known probably for millennia.
I know.
To be what is part of the human existence.
Absolutely.
And when I would hate to see the dissection of the numbers that have come out from care homes,
I
where
just,
the
yeah,
will to live has been turned off.
I know. I mean, I saw a video last week. It really upset me, and I've got a very thick skin. I've been a social worker a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff that's very difficult, but it was really just was like a punch in the gut. It was awful. So it's an older lady and her daughter. So this older lady has been in this care home for like 18 months. The particular care home has put in place some visiting, but it's really limited. So she was getting like once a week for about half an hour. She had to make a 4-hour round trip to go and see her mother for half an hour. At each end of that half hour, she had to put on all of the PPE. She had to take it all off again, etc. and so forth. And then they also, on top of all of that, they put a Perspex screen in place, which just meant that actually her mum couldn't hear her, didn't really understand what was happening. She has dementia as well. And it was so hard to watch because and you could see the difference, I suppose. So she's been videoing her visits all the way through. So she showed me a video of her visiting her mum at the very start of the COVID situation. And you could see that it was really difficult and that they weren't really able to communicate, and that that her mum didn't understand, and that it was very upsetting for the daughter. All of that was very clear from the video. But the video that she took at the end, which is like nearly a year later, so sort of 10, 11 months later, she took a second video. The difference in how her mum presented physically was so marked, I couldn't even begin to describe it. It was like she had become a shell of her former self. She just wasn't there, basically.
Yeah.
So she was completely disengaged, very fetal in her positioning, had lost her ability to walk altogether, wasn't eating, was barely drinking, was crying, looked very distressed in her facial expression. Her daughter, her poor daughter, was just like in bits, really, didn't know what to do.
And a lot of it,
yeah, they
is,
say, oh, this woman is being kept safe. Well, she's not being kept safe. She's not being kept safe.
I mean, Justice Mumby,
It was awful.
who said that you can keep somebody safe, but if it doesn't keep their mind safe, then
if it only makes them miserable, there's no point in doing it. Yeah.
And families understand that crisis.
Yes.
I do think the will to live in those environments is something that has to be as important as putting a child at the centre of care proceedings when they're in that situation. It's that important that the will to live is known to prolong life.
That's right.
Turn it off, and we know that it shortens life. And I think our psychological awareness, our psychological knowledge, psychological understanding has not been engaged in this process in any way, shape, or form.
No.
That is the biggest failure, in my mind, of the overall therapeutic sector at not knocking the door down, taking it off its hinges, and going, you need this
Yeah,
to be
and
in.
I really can't understand why there hasn't been more of a public outcry about all of this. It doesn't really make sense, but I guess if you're not in that situation, perhaps you just don't really appreciate how important it really is, which is why we need therapeutic people to kind of go, hang on a minute, what about this? And to help people understand why it's so important and what a big difference it can make.
Mm.
Nobody's suggesting that, that 200 people should be trumping in and out of care homes every 5 minutes. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
and
nobody's suggesting that, but it's, there is a balance.
It's measured response.
Yeah, there is a balance here, and the balance is well out of whack in my opinion. So some of the things I've been doing, for example, have been like talking to media outlets to try and get stories out there and kind of noted by the public. I've been giving some free advice about social work routes and legal routes that people could use. I've been trying to get on board other people that could help, like lawyers, barristers, other social workers, etc., to try and just pull in as much kind of resistance, I suppose, as possible, and get that message out, that actually that needs to change. It really should have changed already.
Yeah, and APA has been as vocal as we can be for the size we are in the environment in which we're in, to be able to go, please start looking and using the psychological knowledge and understanding that exists. If you ignore this, it's like trying to make a cake without eggs. It ain't gonna taste the right way. You've got to have the right ingredients, and we've got to stop ignoring psychological impacts. And we've already kind of put that support in to work that's going on out there.
Mm.
In a arena where you are regulated by a governing body,
yes,
you have to be affiliated because that is the right thing.
Well, why? I would be arrested if I wasn't.
Well, yeah, and quite rightly so.
Yes,
we've seen some really dangerous situations in the past where people have claimed to be working as a professional when they're not. They've given out advice that's been perceived as being professional advice from someone who isn't, and we've seen the consequences of it. And we've seen people prosecuted, and long may that remain.
Indeed, I agree.
However, as we know, that's a financial burden for the professional. You have to be registered. You have to be that.
Yes, I do.
Why choose to join a voluntary membership as well?
Okay. I've joined two, so I'm obviously collecting them.
It's a certificates, isn't it? It's just like got certificates.
I just like to be part of something. So I've joined BASWA, which is the Social Workers Association. They also provide my insurance and things for practice. And I've joined APA because of the psychology focus, really. So because that's such a big part of my work now, it has been for the last 5 or 6 years. When I found you, I was kind of like, I want a bit of that, because actually that's something that really is my niche, I suppose, and within social work. I feel that it's the thing that I do best, maybe the thing that I do most of. And obviously I want to get better as well, so I'm hoping that I will learn, and that I can also help other people to understand the world of social care a bit more, so that they can help and just have that connection, I guess, with that sort of therapeutic professionals that I wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to connect with, especially working just isolated from myself, for myself, from home. I don't have a team, I don't have a manager, I don't have a colleague, I don't, you know, that's it. So the connections that I create through APA, through LinkedIn, through Baswa, through, you know, all of those kind of places, that's where I get my oh gosh, my peer support, I suppose, my peer sort of keep it real people.
Yeah, and that kind of that network that you're able to connect to on a psychological platform is clearly making a difference.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that APA brought into operation in our first year was the social care navigator. And the navigators, it's not, you know, it's a service provision that allows therapeutic professionals to kind of understand the social work arena in a way that can help them practice with their clients.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that should be more widely available to therapeutic professionals? But do you also think that having external social care navigators for social workers is something that could be beneficial?
I think it would be marvelous because it's like, you know, like what's not to like really about understanding more about what the people that you're working with, what they're facing, what they're going through, how they might find their way through that, where do they go in certain situations, you know, all of those things that I suppose if you stay in your little silo, then you're not going to know. You're never going to know.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out for the therapeutic community that in the last 5 years, the number of historic child abuse cases that have been disclosed through the therapeutic sector has gone through the roof.
It has.
The number of those cases that have successfully made it to court gone through the floor.
Yep.
And that's because the therapeutic sector hasn't got the know-how yet widely as to what that process is in the very first step.
Yep.
And by making mistakes, all well-intentioned, but has allowed local authorities and, you know, agencies and youth organizations to circle the wagons.
Yep.
And that has made life difficult for investigators. It's made life difficult for the person at the center of those situations. But it has ultimately broken the trust between the therapeutic sector and somebody disclosing. And if we don't get the right information in at the right point, and we don't allow that person, however old they are when they disclose, the right support, then we are doing them a disservice.
Yeah.
And we do ourselves as professionals service, whether we are social workers, whether we are therapeutic professionals, whether we're coaches, wherever.
Yeah.
Can you just confirm what the duty of care is when it comes to child at-risk scenarios? Who is responsible for that child if Joe Public has a concern about a child? Who is responsible?
Well, usually it's social services, usually. Occasionally it might be the police. It depends how immediate that risk is. So if that risk is very immediate, then it's police. If it's not very immediate and is more ongoing or is a historic thing, then it would be social services. Where it can fall down sometimes, in my experience anyway, is those people who are, let's say, 16, 17, who disclose something that happened to them when they were younger, maybe to a therapist, maybe to a teacher, maybe to whoever, because they've now reached that age of 16 or 18 in some cases, it's very difficult to get the system to hear them. And
that is a real danger zone for any young person.
Absolutely.
But the responsibility, once something is disclosed to an individual professional, the responsibility rests with that individual.
Yeah,
and
you've got to do something with it. Otherwise, how are you going to sleep at night? You know, you've got to
exactly. And this is where the understanding of confidentiality in those relationships must be boundaried, it must be clear, and it must be communicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And there could be other people at risk. I suppose that's the other thing to remind ourselves of, is that when a perpetrator does something, let's say it's sexual abuse, then when they sexually abuse a child, and that child, when they're older, tells somebody that that's happened to them, done by this particular person, people, those people will not have stopped that kind of behaviour. Just because they've stopped for that one person doesn't mean that they've stopped.
Yeah.
And more than likely means that they've moved on to a different victim who is of the age that they want them to be.
Yeah.
So,
I suppose
we're protecting others as well, aren't we? You know, it's not just that one individual.
Yeah, and I suppose the best two examples I can think of in recent times is the Rotherham case.
Yes.
And what came out about youth football and the Football Association and the football coaching, and how it took a very, very brave former professional to stand up and say, I'm ready to tell you my history and why I broke down the way I did. And what happened was, as is being reported this month in multiple outlets around the country, is that story now is being explored and explained. And men who have been the victims of abuse and have experienced that are now coming forward and saying that happened.
Yeah.
And that, for me, is the biggest positive move forward. And I applaud every single one of those individuals that are sharing their experience.
Yeah, because it's not easy to share, is it?
Yeah.
It's not easy.
And it's always worth pointing out, abuse will hide where there is power.
Yep.
And where there are dreams of the young, abuse will reign.
Yeah.
Because the abuse will manipulate the power that they have over the dreams of. And that has got to be the worst kind of scenario to play out in the life of any young person. But our social workers, it's Social Work Week.
Yes, it is.
This week.
Yeah.
It is Social Work Day, I believe, on Tuesday.
I think it is, yeah.
And I would like to say a massive thank you to everyone who has taken on the mantle of working in social care in whatever arena, but especially those on the front line of social work. So, Jo, thank you so much for what you do. And not give it up. And fighting for that.
Yeah.
And just as we close, I want to kind of leave the last kind of words to you. We know this is a system that is struggling. We know it's a system that is not achieving the outcomes that it really wants to on the front line. And we know there are systemic reasons why that is, and we know there's funding reasons. But in a call to change that, we need more people in the system.
Yes.
Here's your chance to get people into the system.
Oh, blimey. You don't ask for much, do you? Oh gosh, I mean, I'm not sure that anything I say, to be honest, would necessarily bring anybody into the system. I think it's one of these things that people are either drawn to or they're not, I would suggest. I guess once you're in it, then I would advocate for a better support system around those people in it, so that
we're doing our best.
I know. So that they stay in it when they're in it. So, for example, I was a frontline worker for many years, and it did get to that point where actually I had to choose whether to remain a frontline worker and probably not do very well psychologically myself, or whether to do something in a different way. And I chose to do something in a different way, hence I'm sitting here. But it's I suppose it's about that sustainability for me, and I think if you create that, then you will attract the people, because people will always want to work with people. There will be always people who want to help, want to make a difference, want to do something that's meaningful, that feels like it's important in life, so whether that's with children or the older adults or whoever, mental health, whatever it might be, there's always going to be those people that will want to do those things. For me, the challenge is support them properly, and then more people will want to do it. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? So it's almost like the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. So here are some of the things that APA has put into play and has brought to the table for those that don't. So our social care framework for the first contact, take away the conflict dynamic. Have a pre-intervention assessment, not the intervention assessment. Try and support families to avoid the intervention. Work with families. Put the support in place. Upskill those families at the point of need. Do not make them fail an assessment in order to refer them to get support in 9 months. Their life doesn't go on pause. Bring that support, which invariably starts with self-help, but bring that support into that first point of contact. Be there to avoid an intervention rather than facilitate one. And that changes the dynamic straight off the bat. The other things that we're bringing are the support programs through the Community Learning Hive, and making sure that our professionals, our carers, and our young people are getting those core skills that they need right from the very beginning. And then when you've got that, make sure that that psychological support for those therapeutic social workers, family support workers is there from the start. That's before they go out and start working with families. That's part of the training cycle. And let's make sure that we've got those skill sets in place before things go wrong, not reacting to them. And that's where APA sits in supporting social care. I want to thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And for anyone else that is watching, if you have gained anything that is going to help your practice, either in the social work field or in the therapeutic arena, you can get a CPD questionnaire off of our website, and you can have that knowledge that you've gained validated with CPD certificate from Apple. Do not hand out certificates just for watching the video. You've got to let us know that we've learned something. Wait, people actually start to believe that we're getting there. People are learning. It's validated. It has to be.
Yeah.
So for now, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I hope you will join Joe and I in one of our upcoming conversations, because we're actually going to hold a hidden conversation, aren't we, Joe?
Yes, we are.
And the topic of that, in fact, why don't you tell people? We're going to talk about dolls, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And I don't mean the type that you play with that are called like Barbie and Ken. So
let them know, Joe.
Yeah, when we talk about dolls in the social care field, we're talking about the deprivation of liberty safeguards, which is a huge area related to mental capacity and mental health. So yes, we can look forward to that. It's complex, but I will try and make it simple.
I'm really looking forward to it, because I know it's something that the therapeutic sector really does need to grow its awareness of. Yeah. And there's very few professionals, and I don't just mean therapeutic professionals. I'm talking about medical professionals.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about educators. I'm talking about law enforcement, who really need to understand this stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation in the next few weeks. Yep. So thank you very much, everyone else.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you very much. Take care, and we'll see you in another conversation very soon.
Thanks.